fights with passion, and he inspires.
Are you ready for a war?
All right, welcome back to From 8 Arbitration, the third episode of Snow Days. We're going to continue to talk about acts of God. And I've got something I'm going to talk about tonight. This is going to be a very brief episode, but it is something that you're going to need. I'll put it in my case file if I was you. It's M-00970. M-00970, and I've seen this on social media quite a bit. This is really good stuff. It's fantastic stuff, and we call it white pages, and this is something that when we take over, we're going to bring back, because these things are very, very educational, very good. I used to use these all the time back on my window of operation, simultaneous scheduling, and when management had a dispatch of value and stuff like that. This is my go-to when I would do that. And so it's M970, and so you can look that up if you go to the NELC website. Under the MERS, you can find M970. And so I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to be done with it. Tomorrow, I'll do some sites, all right? And we'll pick several different sites for you. And that way, I'll have management's position, our position, try to find different ones that will help you in your whatever your scenario is as far as leave taken and things like that. And so that'll be tomorrow. But this episode will be short. All I'm doing is reading this one thing. But again, it's about repetition. Read 3 things this morning. Probably incredibly boring. You're going to hear a lot of the same stuff tonight. You're going to hear the same stuff tomorrow. But it's repetition. Do you want to be good or do you want to be great? If you want to do good, do the minimum. If you want to be great, it's about repetition. And I want everybody to be great. Whatever we do, whatever position we try to take on, informal, formal, DRT, advocate, whatever, always aspire to be great, okay? And then we're going to do that through repetition, and that's what we're doing here. Administrative leave. Again, this is M970, 00970, okay? M970. Administrative leave. Introduction. All letter carriers try to follow the ideal, neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night, stay those couriers from swift completion of their appointed rounds. However, the Employee and Labor Relations Manual, ELM, recognizes that extreme conditions may make this impossible. Section 519 of the M allows management to grant administrative leave to employees due to acts of God. This paper has been prepared by the NELC Contract Administration Unit to assist branch officers and stewards in handling problems concerning administrative leave for acts of God. This paper summarizes arbitration awards dealing with this section, discusses how arbitrators have handled the issues which frequently arise, and outlines the different criteria used by arbitrators in making their decisions. References in this paper to C cases identify arbitration awards indexed by and contained in NELC's computer arbitration system. These cases may be obtained from NELC's business agents. ELM Section 519 regarding administrative leave reads in part, 519.1. Administrative leave is absence from duty authorized by appropriate postal officials without charge to annual or sick leave and without loss of pay. 519.211. Acts of God involve community disasters such as fire, flood, or storms. The disaster situation must be general rather than personal in scope or impact. It must prevent groups of employees from working or reporting to work. 519.213. Postmasters and or other appropriate postal officials determine whether absences from duty allegedly due to acts of God were, in fact, due to such cause, or whether the employee or employees in question could, with reasonable diligence, have reported to duty. 519.214C. Part-time flexible employees are entitled to credit for hours worked plus enough administrative leave to complete their scheduled tour. The combination of straight time worked and administrative leave may not exceed 8 hours in a service day. If there is a question as to the scheduled work hours, the part-time flexible employee is entitled to the greater of the following. 1. The number of hours the part-time flexible worked on the same service day in the previous service week. Or 2. The number of hours the part-time flexible was scheduled to work. Or 3. The guaranteed hours as provided in the applicable national agreement. 2. The three criteria. ELM Section 519.211 specifies three criteria which must be met before administrative leave may be granted for acts of God. First, the act of God must create a community disaster. Second, the disaster must be general rather than personal in scope and impact. Third, it must prevent groups of employees from working or reporting to work. The majority of arbitrators agree that all three of these criteria must be met before a request for administrative leave is upheld. See C04883, C00074, and C00235. Now, when you pull this up, all this stuff will be on there for you if you're not able to write it down right now. It is up to the postmaster to determine whether the absences from duty, allegedly due to acts of God, were in fact due to such cause, or whether the employee or employees in question could have, with reasonable diligence, reported for duty. However, the postmaster's decision is not beyond question and is subject to review by an arbitrator. See C00359. What is an act of God? A definition commonly used by arbitrators in determining whether an act of God has occurred, which is sufficient to justify the granting of administrative leave, is a natural occurrence of extraordinary and unprecedented impact whose magnitude and destructiveness could not have been anticipated or provided against by the exercise of ordinary foresight. See 04205 and C09057. And that's the reason I love these things. It's because they're going to tell you something. They're going to give you a site for you to produce and put that in your contentions. Or as an advocate, I would always look these up and get these sites off of there because they're very good sites. Snowstorms are most often the reason for granting administrative leave. To qualify as an act of God, the storm must be of such severity to disrupt normal community functions. Generally, arbitrators consider factors such as the amount of snow, the length of time it fell, wind strength, and temperature in determining the severity of the storm. See C00411. C00411. Not every snowstorm or rainstorm can be classified as an act of God, merely because of its unusual or above average intensity. The general rule is that an act of God must create disaster conditions to justify granting administrative leave. See C04205. 04205. The act of God must involve a community disaster. According to the arbitrator in C03964, use of the term disaster means insofar as the community is concerned, a complete shutdown of all the services of a community except for emergency services such as fire, police, and hospitals. In this case, the arbitrator believed there was no doubt that the severe snowstorm which had occurred was an act of God. However, the arbitrator looked to the fact that even though there were no mail deliveries, over 5,000 employees in a nearby military base, both civilian and military, reported for work. Thus, the impact on the community was not great enough to constitute a disaster, and administrative leave was denied. Other factors arbitrators will consider include whether a state of emergency has been declared, evidence of mass road closings, and whether the state police or local authorities have advised persons to stay home. See C04964, C04205, and C05432. And all day long, I've been looking on Facebook, on Twitter, on social media, talking about where Nashville was put under a state of emergency. I talked about all these other things. The temperature, the below average temperature. Here, I think it's a -12 wind chill. The ice, the devastation. I've been sending them the NES as our electrical. National Electric Service. And I've been sending him reports from them about how many outages there are. I've been sending him those screenshots all day long, so if in case he wants to use some, he always does a fantastic job, but I'll always send him things all day long in case he wants to put those in his file, because JB's not on social media. He doesn't have Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. So I'll send him those things, but he always does a good job of pulling stuff off of social media. C00411, the arbitrator granted administrative leave where there was a 3-day snowstorm and the National Guard was called out to rescue people stranded in their cars while other stranded travelers were forced to sleep in schools. C00402 and 00074. According to the arbitrator in C03491, bad conditions, poor weather, difficult conditions, and the like are insufficient to constitute a disaster. A disaster must be an extreme situation. In this case, where the storm did not block main roads and during which many businesses were able to operate normally, the arbitrator denied administrative leave. See also C06622. C06622. When a disaster in general in scope and impact. According to the arbitrator in C00542, the scope and impact of the storm is indicated by the amount of absenteeism among employees scheduled to work that tour. Many arbitrators will consider the number of absences on a given day, but most look to the pattern of absenteeism to make a determination of scope and impact. Where it can be shown that employees from a large general area were prevented from reporting to work by a storm, administrative leave will usually be upheld. See Z09024. C09024. Maps are useful in demonstrating areas where employees live and whether the storm prevented employees from specific areas or general areas from reporting to work. See 00359, see 00410. Most arbitrators would consider a particular employee's difficulties in reporting to work. However, if other employees living in the same area were able to report, arbitrators usually find the disaster to have been personal in scope and impact, unless the employee can demonstrate otherwise. See 03489, see 04964, and see 08197. And I would pull all of those, because if it's one employee that it can help, if it talks about we have 5 employees that drive from this same location, all 4 of them came except this one, why couldn't this one employee get here? Well, it's because on these other things, they live in a community that's flat and everything, but where I live, it's all hilly. I'm back in the woods, and it takes me, if it snows, it takes 3 weeks for that snow to melt because I'm in this wooded area. Ice stays forever, and it's impossible for me to come to work. If we can find something like that, you may be able to be successful. So that's C03489, C04964, and C08197. In C09025, the arbitrator found that the severe thunder and windstorm which hit the area was a community disaster which was general in its scope and impact. However, the arbitrator denied administrative leave where he found that the conditions which prevented the grievance from reporting to work were not generally encountered by other employees. Occasionally, arbitrators determine the scope and impact based upon whether the Postal Service has suspended operations or curtailed mail delivery in C01176. The arbitrator denied administrative leave where there was little impact on postal operations and held that, since there was no curtailment of mail, it was impossible to conclude that there was a disaster situation which was general in nature. See C09033, C04483. However, most arbitrators agree that the ELM does not require the post office to close its doors before administrative leave is granted. C00402. In C00713, the arbitrator stated, the determination of an entitlement to administrative leave does not depend upon whether the post office was closed or not. Section 519.211 imposes no requirement that the office be closed or operations curtailed before employees may receive such leave. C 00447, C 03433, C 04542. And you see why these are so beautiful, because as an advocate, they're doing all the work for you. All these sites, you pull them up. That's most of the time an advocate spends is trying to find the right sites for a particular, like a removal. What kind? Article 8, escalated award, a monetary award. Most of the time an advocate spends outside the case file is trying to find sites. This does all the work for you, and that's why I love these things. But going back to that about it doesn't have to be, postal operations doesn't have to be impacted, no curtailment of mail or anything like that. I read those things off of social media today, off of Facebook, where they said that when we came in, there was no mail, no trucks delivered mail. We had nothing to do. Management told us to sit on our stool. Those are the sites that I'm going to use, okay? Because postal operations were curtailed. You didn't deliver any of the mail to the post office for me to do any work. Matter of fact, one of them said what? They wanted us to go out there and shovel snow. That's not our job. They're trying to find anything for us to do because they have to be there, so they want to make us miserable as well. 3, what constitute groups of employees? Arbitrators most often deny administrative leave to employees because groups of employees were not prevented from reporting to work. Arbitrators are divided on their interpretation of what constitutes a group. In C 04205, the arbitrator stated, as a rule of thumb, it has been held that 50% of the employees in the group must be unable to come to work because of disaster conditions. The rationale of the 50% rule is that if half or more of the employees in the group exercising reasonable diligence are unable to get to work, it is persuasive evidence that the conditions were most abnormal. If less than 50% of the employees in the group are unable to get to work, the inference may be drawn that with the exercise of reasonable diligence, employees could get to work. C 00235, C 03964, C 04483, C 09025, C 09033, and C 09068. Other arbitrators reject that rule. The arbitrator in C 00447 held, it is not determinative that a significant number of employees are able to report to work. The manual only requires that groups of employees must be prevented from work. The 14% of the workforce unable to report because of the snowstorm were granted administrative leave. See C 00452, C 00713. Other arbitrators fall somewhere in the middle of this spectrum and will allow administrative leave if it can be demonstrated that the group is substantial. According to the arbitrator in C 01357, the requirement is not that all employees be unable to report to work, but that the groups of employees who are unable to do so be general, substantial, and that each employee has used reasonable diligence to get to work. The Postal Service's methods of grouping employees can alter the percentage dramatically. See 00448. The Postal Service grouped employees over a 24-hour period, and using these numbers was unable to demonstrate that more than 50% of the employees reported to work. The arbitrator held that this was improper since weather conditions had changed over the 24-hour period. The arbitrator ruled that the Postal Service should group them by tour of duty instead. 3. The postmaster has the discretion to grant administrative leave. Most arbitrators will not substitute their judgment for the judgment of the postmaster unless it was arbitrary or capricious, and that should be very easily done. Because most of these people are saying we came in, they said we're not granting administrative leave. Well, that's arbitrary and capricious. You've not talked to anybody. You've not read the first statement. You don't know what struggles we had trying to get in. They have no idea if there was reasonable diligence on our part to get there. And so those things would be all included in the shop steward statements, that when we came in, the postmaster, whoever said, hey, we're not granting administrative leave. Well, you ain't talked to anybody yet. You've not done any interviews with anybody to see the struggles. And so If I can show a reasonable diligence and the postmaster comes out and says that, then that's what's going to apply here. The ELM gives the postmaster the discretionary authority to grant administrative leave. It does not require that administrative leave be granted. See M-09033. According to the arbitrator in C-03205, the only time an arbitrator might consider overturning the postmaster's decision in such cases would be a situation where the requirements spelled out in the manual were met, and the postmaster's decision appeared to be arbitrary or capricious. See 02340, C 03368. In C-00680, administrative leave was granted to those employees who arrived late to work during a severe snowstorm, but denied to those employees who failed to report to work. The arbitrator held that by granting administrative leave in this limited fashion, management recognized the conditions existed which justified administrative leave. In this case, the postmaster testified that he had never previously granted administrative leave to those employees who failed to come to work because he believed that employees would have less incentive to make an effort to get to work in the future. The arbitrator held that the postmaster was arbitrary in his decision and that there was not a valid reason for denying administrative leave. Most arbitrators agree that Section 519.211 is applicable to a scheduled tour on any day, including a day outside an employee's regular schedule. However, this does not change the provisions of ELM Section 433.1, which mandates that an employee cannot be given more than 40 hours of straight time pay in a service week. In C-06365, where the granting of administrative leave would have given the employees more than 40 hours of straight time pay, the arbitrator held Section 433.1 to be an overriding limitation on the scope of administrative leave and denied the employee's request even though they had met the other three criteria. See 09228. 09228. Proof of reasonable diligence. To justify a request for administrative leave, most arbitrators require that employees to have exercised reasonable diligence in attempting to report to work. Some arbitrators will make this determination based upon the general conditions of the area and do not require specific proof. Other arbitrators require the employee to present specific proof that they have exercised reasonable diligence and still were unable to report to work. And on the safe side, I'm going to make the carriers write me a statement, very detailed statement, send me pictures or whatever. On the safe side. I don't want an arbitrator to go in there and have an arbitrator that says, I need you to talk to me about what happened, and we have nothing in the file. See 00616, the arbitrator held that where the postmaster concluded that some employees did not exercise reasonable diligence because their neighbors were able to report to work, this established a prima facie case which the union had to refute by submitting proof that the absent employees did, in fact, exercise reasonable diligence. See 03433. The arbitrator denied request for administrative leave where the Postal Service did not suspend operations and the arbitrator was given no evidence of the diligence of the employees. In C-00581, where the storm was of sufficient severity to force a halt to community activity and had an equally severe effect on the service, the arbitrator granted administrative leave to the two grievants who testified. However, the arbitrator denied administrative leave to the other employees who failed to produce affidavits or other evidence that they have exercised reasonable diligence in their efforts to report to work. And that's what I'm talking about. Always be on the safe side, get statements. According to the arbitrator in C-00411, proof of such effort will involve the various means available to the employee to get to work and the feasibility of those means. Such means can be a personal automobile or various specialized automotive vehicles such as a four-wheel drive vehicle, snowmobile, trucks, and the like. The arbitrator held that an employee must show that alternate means were unavailable or the effort would have been futile before administrative leave is granted. See 09024. According to the arbitrator in C-05290, In determining reasonable diligence, one must look to the general norm or a reasonable range of expected behavior. In this case, even though half of the employees were able to report to work, the arbitrator held that the storm was severe enough to be a legitimate basis for the judgment of many that reporting in would be futile, unsafe, and imprudent. See 00402. Converting other leave to administrative leave. Generally, where employees report to work and management has work available, administrative leave will not be warranted if the employee elects to leave early. In C00614, management gave employees who reported to work and worked most of their shift the option of leaving early or performing additional work that was available. In this situation, the arbitrator held that administrative leave was not justified for those employees who elected to leave early. See 01590, see 01850. When an employee has been granted annual leave or leave without pay to cover an absence due to an act of God, most arbitrators hold that this will not prevent the employee from receiving administrative leave if it is later determined to be warranted in addition. When management grants administrative leave to excuse those who arrive late or left early during a disaster, most arbitrators consider this to be a recognition by management that the three criteria were met. In these circumstances, those who are unable to report to work are granted administrative leave. In C00680, management granted administrative leave to those employees who arrived late to work, but denied it to those who were unable to report to work. The arbitrator held that by granting administrative leave to late employees, management recognized that the conditions justifying administrative leave were present. Therefore, the arbitrator found that management acted unreasonably and that administrative leave was warranted for those employees who were unable to report to work on that day. See C00411, C00614. And that, my friends, is M-00970, the last of the things I'm going to read like that. So it's repetition. And you see why I love white pages so much. Those things are invaluable, and we need to bring those back. I don't think they're doing them anymore. But I used to use these all the time when I was a formal A and when I was an advocate. They're a gold mine for things like this. Arbitration sites, how many did I just read? 70? That's why these things are so great. Again, when I was doing the Acts of God, Lake Charles, I read the white pages forever, 1,000 times, trying to get arguments when I went down there with A.J. Bro. Those things are invaluable to me. Simultaneous scheduling, window of operation, dispatch of value, and this here, Act of God. And so we'll bring those back when the CLC takes over, things like this, because education is paramount, especially with what we're going to do, the things that we're going to do. We're going to go on the offensive as soon as we get in there, and education is paramount. Like I've been saying, informals, formals, DRT, especially advocates. Get yourself ready, okay? Educate yourself as much as possible, because when the CLC takes over, we are going on the offensive, okay? And but there you have it, M-00970, Snow Daze, miniseries, episode 3. Hoped it helped, all right? Hey, I love y'all very much. Y'all have a fantastic rest of the night. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to continue on with the miniseries. Why? Because I have no power at the house. We're in a hotel, and I'm just sitting here, and I'm gonna keep doing these. How's that sound? All right. I love you. Y'all have a fantastic rest of the night. Talk to y'all tomorrow. Bye.